The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
Michael!
What the? Hey, sorry about that.
Evil dies tonight.
I'm now finally able to say I've completely finished watching the entirety of the Halloween series. At one point, I was a person who would say they've watched the original movie and the David Gordon Green trilogy. I may have even been one of those lost souls who had finished the David Gordon Green trilogy before watching the 1978 Halloween, though we can't know for sure. Regardless of the order or the amount of films from the series you've seen, it doesn't take a rocket surgeon to understand the impact that Michael Myers has had on horror and, with that, popular culture. One of my fellow collaborators, Horror Rev, who's been on the channel and has his own podcast, shared with me his love for the 1978 classic when we first spoke. While just a short few years ago, I may not have fully understood the magnitude of the 1978 film's impact, I feel today I am closer to fully understanding that. To get the weight that this film brought upon the cinematic landscape, it helps to try to put ourselves in the shoes of those who were watching it when it was first released. Imagine a world full of browns, oranges, the color, not the fruit, and greens. Shag carpet is as prevalent as cigarette smoke. Your friends wear corduroy pants or Levi jeans with flip-flops and t-shirts. The Vietnam War has ended, but with it the impact remains. Crime is being committed at all-time highs year after year, and names like Charles Manson, John Wayne Gacy, Son of Sam, and Ted Bundy are bursting onto the scene for their horrific crimes. Insert John Carpenter, a director whose debut film was greeted to nearly empty theaters, years away from receiving its first claims of praise, followed by a film called Assault on Precinct 13, which would gain praise shortly after airing at Cannes, or Cannes for those of you who probably called it that for a long time growing up, from horror legend George A. Romero. His ability to depict a town on fire, for lack of a better term, was merely setting the stage for one of his many masterpieces on which John Carpenter would share with the world, that first being Halloween. It was ultimately because of Carpenter's film Assault on Precinct 13 that he was sought out for the project being Halloween, and after 10 days, Carpenter and Deborah Hill created history. On a merely $300,000 budget, think about that. This is a micro budget film by today's standards, though with inflation, I'm not sure if it would still be considered so, but bear with me. This movie would amass a box office sum of $70 million, and with it, introduce the world to the man who would become a true boogeyman, Michael Myers. To insert my opinion on this film, Michael Myers is among the greatest horror villains within this film because he is steeped, absolutely dripping in mystique. At the young age of 6, he kills his sister, only to return 15 years later to continue a rampage the likes we've never seen before. Michael dons a mask during his murders, and we never hear him utter a syllable throughout the film. His motivations are for us, the audience, to argue and mull over and are not given to us directly. When he is seemingly defeated, we are stunned again to find that he is not dead. Many an analysis of the film find the mask, Michael's seeming invincibility, and Dr. Loomis's diatribe to lean heavily into Michael representing evil. Evil's cold, uncaring, and evil never dies. What makes this so brilliant in comparison to some of the sequels to follow is that there is room for doubt if Michael is human, superhuman, invincible, or what have you. Yes, the bullets, they have tremendous stopping power. That much is made clear throughout the runtime of the film and would ground a normal man for good, but there's a grounded believability to him surviving it that it adds perfectly to the mystique of Michael Myers. We also have a psychosexual aspect to the film. Michael's sister is having intercourse before her demise, and all of the victims upon his return are quote unquote guilty of some sexual transgression up into Laurie Strode's conflict, and minus, of course, the mechanic that Michael Myers murders upon his release, or I guess escape, from the sanitarium bus transit. I have no explanation when it comes to the killing of the mechanic, though the film says time and time again throughout its 13 film runtimes that Michael will kill those he is after and anyone who stands in his way. Here, the mechanic is merely an obstacle, someone in the way. To me, the film does a tremendous job of building up the importance of the original sister, and it pains me deeply to have to say original sister, Judith Myers. A through line the series tries to retroactively apply to Laurie later on, unfortunately so. Like a twist upon the Oedipus complex, there could be a theme of Michael wanting his sister all to himself and then lashing out when another man comes between them. To Michael, Halloween night 1963, the night he kills Judith Myers, is the night that sex, affection becomes inexplicably linked to violence. The first person perspective to the assault allows us to imagine a lustful mindset on behalf of the character that is Michael, and which we are seeing through despite the villain's incredibly young age, even if it has no context to sex for, again, someone of this young age. Now, I know without a shadow of a doubt, those who oppose this theory will point to this section for discrediting all of the theories and the potential purpose of my video. I, however, maintain that whether it be subconscious or not, there is a string that can be connected between this violent action to possess the sister, in my words, and the need to reenact it in his adulthood. His return to Haddonfield, to me, is proof that he has been ruminating on the feeling that he felt during that 1963 Halloween night with a much more mature physical makeup, and seeks to unleash some distorted sexual awakening on this town. While none of the crimes that would dominate the headlines of the 70s are quite as sensational as Michael Myers, I think it wise to use the real world source material as reference because it likely had a lot of impact on Deborah Hill and John Carpenter. Bundy, Gacy, and Berkowitz were all sexually motivated in their crimes, with all three having a familial impact that could have led them on their paths. Both Berkowitz and Bundy were adopted with varying identity crises or crisi, or however you want to call it, occurring for the now infamous killers once learning of their adoptive status. Add to that Gacy was belittled by his own father and accused of being a homosexual. In some ways, the crimes of these three could be seen as a direct response to their parental figures, matching the sex of their later victims. So the mothers of Berkowitz and Bundy, putting them up for adoption, matching the female victims that they would later go on to kill, for lack of a better term. And then Gacy, his father and him had a very strained relationship, and he would go on to kill men or boys. These three were able to finally take back some control through violence over their victims, and in doing so, achieve sexual gratification. Not fun to think about, but worth mentioning for tying this back into Michael Myers. And while the three above, or that the three that I just mentioned, I think are sufficient examples for comparative purposes, let's take one last look at a monster who seems more like Michael than any of the others. C. Edmund Kemper, 6'9", genius intellect, and slayer of 10 victims. Kemper would harbor dark fantasies early in his childhood and committed his first murder at age 15. He would serve time at a mental facility and upon release go through his own quote-unquote sexual awakening by killing college co-eds. These co-eds served as a forbidden fruit, as the mother worked at a university and saw Edmund as below them societally and not worthy of meeting them. Kemper would end his rampage by killing his mother and doing some very unsavory things with her head post-mortem. Kemper's devious path is rooted in realism. His mother was seen as someone so domineering that he felt he had to build up to her, or build up to finally committing an act against her, whereas Michael goes in the opposite direction and starts from a much younger age. Michael may not have even hated his sister, but then again, maybe Kemper didn't necessarily hate his mother and had more, or much more, complex feelings than a normal brain like ours could dare to process. I see a number of similarities between Kemper and Myers, and would think Kemper to be the closest real-world comparison to Michael Myers. For a 6-year-old, a true sexual element is far-fetched, and I know you're all thinking that. It is reasonable that in this universe he was trying to control the love of his sister, which would ultimately devolve as he grew older. If we are to look at the crimes through this lens, Michael's personification of evil is driven by control and lust at the time of the film, or rather the 1978 events. Though the mystery of whether this is correct is what makes the movie so interesting. What fuels the fear is that an entity like Michael can return to a suburban area like Haddonfield like a curse. The suburbs became prominent as the return of GIs came about following World War II. In the 1950s and 60s, this trend continued in what is called white flight, where Caucasian families moved to predominantly white suburbs. Some may have seen the mass migration as a response to the skyrocketing crime rates that were taking place in the city, and Michael serves as a counter to this strategy, attempting to instill fear in the minds of those who feel safer in more rural areas. For its time, Halloween is transcendent to the slasher genre in America and seen among the likes of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for bringing the genre to prominence domestically. These two films are transcendent to the genre for their deep socio-political themes and the effectiveness of their storytelling. It would be remiss if these two films were not mentioned in etching the names of John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper among the upper echelon of horror artists. Halloween 1978 is currently among my top 10 horror films of all time, with a masterpiece rating of 4.5 out of 5, which leaves it in the same tier as my 1 through 24 choices. Myers / The Boogeyman is also among my top 4 horror icons of all time. For this movie, a statement I would argue vehemently. But where does this series go from here? When a film makes over 200 times its shooting budget, there will be a lot of pressure to keep the ball rolling. In today's day and age, we are all too familiar with reboots, sequels, and prequels, with recent reports estimating around 50 to 60% of movies fall into this category. John Carpenter was reluctant to direct a sequel project, and because of this, appointed the duties of director to Rick Rosenthal for him to make his debut film, Halloween 2. The film should be looked at as a financial success, grossing $25.5 million on a shooting budget of $2.5 million. While it merely 10x'd its profit on Halloween 2 in comparison to 200xing it like Halloween 1 had, the cash cow could be seen as alive and well despite this decline in profit and gross income. The story takes place immediately following the events of Halloween 1, even restating or re-showing a portion of the end of Halloween 1 at the beginning of Halloween 2. Rosenthal clearly tried to maintain many of the aspects that made Halloween 1978 a success while inserting more graphic violence and blood, which makes the film more at home with the contemporary slashers of the early 80s. Bringing back Dr. Loomis, played by screen legend Donald Pleasence, was a trend that would follow in many other Halloween iterations, and Laurie Strode would also go on to reprise her role in this film. This movie is eventful in that it leans more into the connection between Michael and Laurie and less of a sexual subtext that could be analyzed into the first and more familial. It is revealed here that Laurie is the sister of Michael, which explains in the minds of the audience why Michael came back. While this was quite the revelation for audience members at the time, it served as a plotline that would lead the series down a path that was near impossible to course correct. And not as though Quentin Tarantino is the authority on all things horror, though I love listening to his interviews and reading his writings on film. He agrees that this is just nonsensical, that us fans know that the relationship between Laurie and Michael is not able to be boiled down to such a last-minute twist, such as it was tried in Halloween 2. It also makes the kills much clearer as to the motive, that being to get to Laurie and destroying anyone in his path, with only some of the victims showing any sexual promiscuity prior to their demise. The film also leans much harder into the indestructibility of Myers and a potential occult explanation. Halloween 2 is a fun film while you're experiencing it, but these two creative decisions are ones that in a big way undermine the nearly perfectly crafted character that we have in Halloween 1. Acknowledging that Michael Myers has special powers or could have an occult connection to me seems to cheapen the brilliance of him surviving Loomis's gunshot wounds. Explaining the connection between Laurie and Michael also makes the story less evergreen to all women watching. You can better relate to a woman who is blindly followed and attacked for potentially looking like his sister, but not one that is literally his sister, unless you have a very strange brother. While I gave this film a 3.5 out of 5 upon watching it, now having completed the entire series, I have the hindsight to realize that this set the series back quite a bit as it tainted the formula that made the original so divine. We are now into Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, a film that will have undoubtedly disappointed those who wanted more Michael Myers, as he appears only in a TV commercial for the real-life film in this film's universe. Whereas 1 and 2 were slasher films, this is a film based around witchcraft and science fiction, as Carpenter and Hill, writers for the first 2 films, envisioned Halloween as a potential for an anthology series. Box office success was much more modest compared to 1 and 2, as well as the film grossed $14 million on a $5 million budget. The film has seen mixed reviews upon its release, and even today, though it has amassed a cult following over the years. A polarizing take is not surprising considering the jolting change of pace from its predecessors, but I have respect for this film even if it isn't nearly as highly rated compared to those who are part of that cult audience. My rating versus their rating. I'm not nearly as high as they are. I gave this film a 3 out of 5 and think it is a decent standalone film that has the incredible shadow to try and shake out of. With 10 years passed since the original Halloween and 7 years since the last sightings of Michael Myers, fans were salivating at the opportunity to see more of him. This isn't immediately apparent through the box office, as the film grossed nearly $18 million on a $5 million budget, which is a noticeable drop from Halloween 2, but increase from Halloween 3. This film continues to lean further into the indestructibility characteristics established into, as well as the familial link between Michael and his prey, this time with his niece being the key. Dr. Loomis and Michael are both back in the saddle despite an insane explosion taking place at the end of Halloween 2. The suspension of disbelief is continually pushed as we progress the story from 2 until its untimely reset by Rob Zombie, which we will get to later in this video. The film does explore some different themes that in some ways seek to redeem itself against these questionable creative decisions. For one, the film does well to show the terror of the town under assault, with the electricity going out and the police force coming under distress due to Michael's actions. We also get a nod to hereditary factors playing a role in the evil that seemingly possesses Michael as it affects Jamie Lloyd, who is related to Michael Myers. It is brought into question whether bloodline or a physical curse is at play due to contact between Michael and Jamie before Jamie commits physical violence at the end of the film herself. The ills of this film are quite large, unfortunately. Jamie is too much of an uninteresting character to have as either a protagonist or future antagonist. There are head-scratching moments such as the good guys trying to dispatch of Michael despite him showing There are head-scratching moments such as the good guys trying to dispatch of Michael despite him showing pseudo-superhuman abilities, leaving him for dead without a body as proof feels very Bush League to me. While the evil that lingers within Jamie at the end does somewhat add more mystery around Michael, it pales in comparison to the mystique that he had going for him in Halloween 1978. The destruction is on a larger scale, but upping the ante does not immediately equate to more visceral scares, which was a department that the original succeeded in greatly. The substitution of supernatural horror, having a monster in Michael Myers in place of a man/myth who preyed on our psyche and ratcheted up the suspense, is an unfortunate decision further solidified in this film. The change of pace began in Halloween 2, but after this film, the Titanic feels set to make blind impact on the iceberg of failure that is to come. All said, immediately after watching this, I gave Halloween 4 a 3 out of 5 and feel like it would have been an appropriate time to plan a reboot or remake for the health of the series. As with all things, hindsight is 20/20, and I look upon this maybe less favorably after the fact. Halloween 5 is where I personally was truly able to identify the deficiencies of the series in real time. As I said, the hindsight of reviewing them all retroactively allows me to pick up the clues after the fact, but it is apparent while watching 5 that something is amiss. The profits of the series continue to shrink as the film makes close to $12 million on a nearly $6 million budget. In my calculations, the film would have lost $2.15 million if you were to include the regular marketing costs within the budget. There is a very real possibility that home video helped alleviate any financial burden or even help the film eventually turn a profit, but clearly the 1 year gap between 4 and 5 was not enough to tantalize fans to watch this in theater as they once had. To add to that fact, the critical and fan opinion on the film had dropped steadily in comparison to 1, 2, and 4, which leads to a perfect storm for a lack of success. The opening of the film only highlights the stupidity of the actions in trying to kill Michael, which I criticized before. He was knocked down a mine shaft and had dynamite thrown down it to kill him, only for him to escape down a river. It is impressive for a child who was institutionalized or comatose since the age of 6 to be able to drive and swim, but we have bigger fish to fry. This film continues to lean into supernatural territory with the reveal of a telepathic link between Jamie Lloyd, the niece mentioned in the previous movie, and her uncle, Michael Myers, the titular antagonist of the entire series, whom I'm sure you're familiar. The stupidity in this film is only growing as we have 2 intentionally bumbling police officers played up for comedic purposes and teens who have a death wish who rush these officers who, as you know, have guns for the, just trying to do a little prank. It's just a prank, dude. Probably not the best idea to prank cops, but in a way, this was perhaps the first film in which I was completely rooting for Michael because of characters like this, though this is something that becomes a trend moving forward. Maybe not a trend, but this isn't the first time it's going to happen. We then see, for the first time to my knowledge, Michael's compassion, which is quickly followed by rage. Michael is tranquilized with, you guessed it, tranquilizers by way of Dr. Loomis, who has been in every Halloween film thus far, minus Halloween 3, which is not canonically linked to the Michael Myers proper Halloween series. Only for Loomis to then stroke out before attempting or being able to finish off Michael. The icing on the cake, however, is this asinine ending in which a man in black frees Michael from police custody, foreshadowing a much deeper lore than we had known about Michael previously. While there is a film in which Michael dies, this is the first film to do so completely because it kills the character from 1978 and creates an abomination that is only recognizable because of the appearance, and yet even that is skewed in this film. Seriously, what the hell was up with that mask? I am all for deepening the lore of horror characters, and I love analyzing those lore dumps after the fact. But madness on its own is something deeply intriguing, and this film rejects this premise for a supernatural angle that I find to be the antithesis of the character's origin. I know my rating and rankings are highly subjective, and many will disagree with my opinions on this, which I encourage. However, this film is among the worst of the series. I give it a 2.5 out of 5. Unfortunately for the series, the next film is no better than Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. This film, Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, is the last film in which Donald Pleasence recurs his role as Dr. Loomis, which is very sad. Rest in paradise, sweet prince. As is to be expected, because of the ending of The Revenge of Michael Myers, we have a whole occult element to explore. The film tries to make the best out of this, but utterly eviscerates the character that is Michael Myers, kind of a process that started proper in the film previous to this. The film alludes to Samhain, a Gaelic/pagan festival that takes place after Halloween, which was first mentioned in Halloween 2. This film isn't incredibly confusing after you watch it, but in remembering all the lore they try to add, it does become tedious. The sanatorium where Michael was originally kept studied evil and marked Michael as cursed or a cursed child with a runic thorn symbol on his wrist. The cult had intended to pass Michael's curse onto a new child who would be Kara Strode's child. The reason for this is to concentrate the bad luck or evil of a generation onto one person rather than risk the group's fortune. The ending is kind of lackluster, even in the producer's cut, which is what I saw, where Loomis is now in charge, quote unquote, of the cult, and Michael is still on the loose. To say Halloween 5 does Michael Myers a disservice is really a preamble to this film, which continues to drive a stake through the heart of this classic character. It's revisionist history at best, and too long a peek behind the curtain of what Michael is for sure. I do not care for this film. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5, but it deserves worse in retrospect and have it ranked as the worst of the series. Somehow this film made $15.1 million on a $5 million budget, beating Halloween 5 in profitability. Up next, we have a film, H2O, which was one I'd heard thrown around constantly as being a typically bad sequel. While it's unlikely to win any awards regardless of Quentin Tarantino's love for Jamie Lee Curtis's performance as Laurie Strode, I find this to be a step in the right direction. And to Tarantino's credit, Curtis actually literally was awarded by multiple horror outlets for this performance. Yes, it continues down the line that Strode is still Michael's sister, but it doesn't continue on with the Gaelic/ruin voodoo nonsense. This film did very well financially, grossing $75 million on a $17 million budget, and Halloween H2O, as it's commonly referred to, marks the, you guessed it, 20-year anniversary from the first film. The film is the return of Laurie Strode, a character who we had not seen since Halloween 2, which is addressed through her faking her own death storyline wise, which I can buy if it were a witness protection program sort of cover up, I guess. In this film, she has a child played by Josh Hartnett. Both are at a California boarding school where Laurie is the headmistress and her son, John, attends this school. John, of course, is Josh Hartnett. What I enjoy about this film is that there are likable characters, which is not always the case in this series. We also get terrific scenes between Laurie and her son John as they try to navigate a strained relationship, mostly caused by the trauma that Laurie went through on that iconic Halloween night. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I do find the connection between Michael and Laurie to be magical and iconic. Having Michael stalk Laurie in a new chapter in her life is important storytelling and interesting as we get a closer look as to how the first attacks changed her. The violence is also seemingly amped up a bit, which I'm a fan of. The ending is pretty badass too, though a potentially intentional element comes back up, which seems silly in this movie in retrospect, but I'm more punitive in my thoughts and assessments on this element for the next movie. Thematically, this doesn't add a ton, though, as it continues to explore things that it's set up from the original. The more intense focus on Laurie again is iconic and in some ways does distinguish the franchise from others like it. For example, Jason is going after new casts of characters throughout Halloween. I guess Art the Clown has people that, specific people that he has ties to and why he's chasing them. But you get the point. In slasher films, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's not always a connection between predator and prey, where it is very, very important in this film. Again, I really enjoy that. I do find it to be more terrifying if Michael is after all women instead of one woman, kind of, even though I'm taking away a little bit from what I said previously. But to the series' credit, Laurie represents any and all women in my mind. She's the prototypical heroine. We also have hints to the fear of this madness being hereditary, which is semi-interesting, but honestly not at the expense of Strode and Michael's defined connection. I give this film a 3 out of 5 and feel as though it's right above middle of the pack for the whole series, in my opinion. Halloween Resurrection is our next film and another disappointment for the franchise. In fact, this film has the lowest consensus rating out of any Halloween movie. I personally have it ranked second worst, but I could be swayed to having it be worst if a good enough argument were made. The beginning does, in a way, take a shot at the audience, and I'll explain, but before I do, I must mention that my girlfriend made audible mention that I think that's weird that he still has his mask on, Michael, that is. Well, turns out it wasn't Michael, but we're supposed to think that at the end of H2O. So Strode beheads the masked man at the end of the film, but guess what? I kind of gave it away. It wasn't Michael. This feels like an example of one film crapping all over the other just to justify its own existence. The joke is on Resurrection, though, as it is no longer canon. So right back at you, buddy. Commercially, this film would have just barely made profit by my calculation with a $15 million shooting budget. Remember, that's just the money that went towards shooting the film, and a $37.6 million box office. Not only does the film start stupidly with the reveal, which ruins the end of H2O, but then Strode dies unceremoniously after trapping Michael on a roof, but unable to pull the trigger on murdering him for good until she can know for sure that it's truly Michael, because she has all this guilt that she beheaded someone who just had the mask on, and now it's another guy with the mask. Maybe it's not Michael again. Though, I do find it funny how taking off the mask is important when they're chasing you with a knife, but not when they are incapacitated and thought to be a dead body trying to get out of a body bag. But what do I know? Also, after getting a taste for how dynamic the Strode and Michael relationship, or Strode and Myers relationship is, I wasn't keen on throwing it away so readily. There's no real replacement for the blood feud of Strode v. Myers. It's kind of like a WrestleMania matchup, to be honest, but the film's main premise is a haunted stream from the Myers house. As a former fan of ghost shows like this and movies that follow plots like this, I'm honestly not upset with the premise. The terrible video quality that we get from these mobile cams do leave something to be desired, however. Also, the whole cast is generally unlikable, to the point I only barely like Busta Rhymes, and the only person that I guess I like, and not in a school girl type of way, is Michael in this film. Busta Rhymes using Kung Fu on Michael is almost as laughable as the directors thinking this would be prime for a follow-up sequel.
So you want to be on Dangertainment? Let's see what you got.
This shares the honor of being the second film that made the franchise course correct because of its bad reputation, and so shortly after the first one that made them do this. It really can be boiled down to the fact that Michael has been shown to be linked to Laurie in previous films, and they immediately killed that storyline. What we're then left with is him protecting the house he grew up in, which is very much overshadowed by the previous story, to be honest. My understanding from a rudimentary Wikipedia reading is that Laurie was not super or not Laurie, Jamie Lee Curtis, but she plays Laurie. She wasn't super keen on the movie, so I can't entirely blame the production for not going this route or continuing down that route for this movie, because what are you going to do if she doesn't want to be a part of it, right? But all said, what they did come up with wasn't great. This film gets a 2.5 out of 5, and again, probably deserves worse. We are now into the Rob Zombie era of Halloween, which is probably the most polarizing era of them all. Definitely for Halloween, but as far as horror films go, this is very polarizing. I grew up liking House of a Thousand Corpses, so I wanted to like his entries, but the beginning of his first remake, Halloween, does not make it easy. The overtly over-the-top trashiness of the Myers family is off-putting, to say the least. It is a remake of the original, necessary after the disaster that is Resurrection, with added context from Michael's childhood and then some additional conflict that differs from the 1978 ending. This film made $80 million on a $15 million budget and was ultimately a success, even if it garnered mixed reviews. Zombie is unfortunately guilty for continuing the cardinal sin that is perpetuating the sibling relationship between Laurie and Michael in his films. The movie does well in a few categories, however, as it is, shows us a progression from a scary yet troubling child to a devoid of humanity maniac. The film also creates the most physically imposing version of Michael we've ever seen. The violence is cranked up to a level we've never seen before either. Michael's upbringing gives us an understanding of why he became what he becomes, even if the mystery, in my opinion, was better. While nothing can top the ending of the 1978 film, I did enjoy Zombie's ending for Halloween. There's a lot of good and bad about this film, but I, for one, have it in my top 5 for the franchise. The same cannot be said about Zombie's follow-up, Halloween 2. Like Zombie's remake of the original, the remake of the sequel, which admittedly isn't a remake, but branching off from Zombie's remake of Halloween 1. A bit confusing, but it's not that confusing in real life. I just made it so. Is a worse version of the film in which it shares a title with. Like it, love it, or hate it, the 1981 version, I think we can agree, is better than Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie, which was a miss and a financial burden because of that. Well, not a burden, but it felt the burden of not being as good as Halloween 1 as well, because the film grossed $39.4 million on a $15 million budget, which would mean a slight profit by my calculations, but a steep decline from the $80 million gross of Zombie's last Halloween film. In some aspects, it is to be expected, where the original titles went from $70 million on Halloween 1978 to $25 million in Halloween 2. We get the 80 to 39. So with inflation being a thing, it's maybe not as terrible as it sounds. But from another standpoint, the original titles over 200 times their budget, rather, and then 10x their budget. The two zombie films only 5x'd their budget with their box office, and then 2x'd their budget with its box office. All to say, the original two were more profitable than Zombies 2. Enough about finance, though. I'll start with the aspects I liked, which was the hospital massacre that only turned out to be a dream. Some people don't appreciate that it was a dream sequence, but I really found Michael to be amongst his most terrifying during that sequence. Where the film goes off the hinges, in my opinion, is the hallucinations of Laurie seeing her mother and the perceived importance of the white horse. Of the legitimate criticisms I've come across, slapped together is what most accurately describes how this film comes across in my mind. I understand they were trying to explore the familial link and how it is cursed with a psychological predisposition to madness and violence. I just don't think it comes out right. I also disliked just about every character except Brad Dourif, who is a gem in most any film, and again, Michael Myers. This is, as I said previously, a very polarizing era for the series, so I can see if others argued the brilliance of this film and all of Zombies films. I, for one, am one who likes violence and would generally enjoy the dream sequences in other films, but they didn't grab me in this one. It is worth mentioning that in an interview, Zombie said he took this film to try to get out of his 3-film contract for the series, which he was able to accomplish. We are now left with the David Gordon Green trilogy to finish off this retrospective. I was surprised at how much I liked the 2018 Halloween. Financially, this film is the closest to replicating the incredible success of the first film, as it makes a whopping $259.9 million box office on just a $10 million budget. From the respect this film gives Michael in his reintroduction at the top of the film, to the homage paid to the original in him breaking free, to the character development of Laurie, to the ending, there is a lot to commend this film for. I'm so on the inclusion of Ranbir Sartain, the psychiatrist, though it doesn't negatively affect the film's rating for me. I feel similarly for Deputy Hawkins, though he becomes one of the only likable characters as the series progresses. Strode's transformation from girl next door to a bona fide Sarah Connor badass is quite the transformation. It adds interesting dynamics as well, since she has 2 generations of Strode girls beneath her to show the effect this has had on an entire family. There's entertaining and engaging shots too, cinematically, that make this film feel like a love letter to the original, which was great for its cinematography. I don't have a lot of negative aspects to drag up, quite honestly, for this one. So also, dropping the family relationship between Laurie and Michael was long overdue. This film gets a 3.5 out of 5. Halloween Kills is a film I had to re-watch to truly understand my dislike for it, though there may be some underlying brilliance there. Financially, this was successful again, grossing $133 million on a $20 million budget. To me, Halloween Kills is closer to hitting the mark than missing compared to other films I would consider failures in the series. It actually tries to do something and seems to have some thought put into it. In my memory, I thought the outlandishness of the ending and beginning were my bugaboos about this film, and that's partially correct. Yes, the opening where Michael emerges like a phoenix is visually incredible. But it is very far-fetched. Michael then killing a mob after getting his ass kicked is eye-rolling despite cool cinematography during the fight. Both of these elements I could honestly be argued into finding not as bad, though my current take is mixed on the opening and staunchly against the climax. Personally, the absolute ending where Karen is killed is actually pretty badass. I don't have many problems with that. There's some thought into her trying to see what made him do it, and the answer eluding her, plus the whole scenario leading to her death. I enjoyed it. Was it something he saw? His abyss of a soul staring back at him, perhaps? But here's the best theory I've come up with as to why the mob climax isn't as bad, though it's kind of a gymnast level stretch. The mob killing was a sacrifice for the killing of the other suspect, the other psychiatric runaway, and most importantly, as a way to purge the memory and curse of Michael from Haddonfield. Their death, while played out in reality, is symbolic of them expelling the mythos that has allowed Michael to become stronger than ever. I think it plays well with how the perception of the other patient led to his death, though that aspect of the film was a portion I wasn't fond of. I honestly think the mob scene, if it was trying for something like that, was literally on the verge of something special that just didn't quite work for me. I gave this film a 2.5 out of 5, which leaves us with just one film left in the franchise, Halloween Ends. This is another film that feels on the verge of catching something special, only to have it slip through its fingers. Clearly, the team around the last two movies are playing with perception with the inclusion of Corey. I will forgive the character that is Corey, as he has some cool ass kills and leads to an interesting opening. The reason I dislike this film is much more apparent to me than the previous one. For one, I find Allison and Corey's relationship to be painful to watch. Having two broken characters find love in each other combined with pseudo-anarchist dialogue is nearly vomit-inducing. The film may have been better if this didn't take up a large aspect of it, but on top of that, the use of Michael Myers felt like it was very via reused or repurposed scripts. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the drain ditch element felt like a combination of Freddy vs. Jason and that he needed more fear to buff himself, and also reminisce of the It movies. In some aspects, I do like the parallel between Corey and Michael. There is or was a perception that Corey was a monster like Michael because of his babysitting incident. It leads us, the audience members, to think about the reality of the situation that Michael's was or could have been. Was it an innocent mistake from a child in 63 who could not understand the consequences of such actions, who turned into the monster he was painted to be as he grew up? As Corey descends this path, it becomes all the more believable that that is a real possibility. The descent also simultaneously has us building back up the myth and legend of Michael to be able to come back one final time. It's as though he has been undying for this long because he was not a man, but a thought or an idea previously. I give this film this olive branch of good tidings until we get to the climax where Corey and Michael face off with Laurie. This face-off feels good from a violence perspective, but brings back none of the ingenuity or good ideas that seemingly came before it. It was actually so lackluster, in my opinion, that it makes me doubt the good readings into both Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. That is why both of these films received a 2.5 from me, as I really don't know for sure if any of those kind of schizo thoughts that I had before were intentional. Despite more mixed reviews such as my own on this film, it was a financial success with a gross of $105 million on a $33 million budget. My rankings of the series are as follows, with Halloween 78 being number 1, Halloween 18 being number 2, Halloween 2 being number 3, Halloween 3 being number 4, Halloween 07 being number 5, H2O6, Halloween 4 7, Halloween Kills 8, Halloween Ends 9, Halloween 209 is 10, Halloween 5 11, Halloween Resurrection 12, and The Curse of Michael Myers being 13th. Take into account I'm generally fairly kind with my ratings, and take a look at my letterbox list down below if you want to look at the rankings and short written reviews. Let me know what I did right. What did I get wrong? Would you want to see more Michael Myers? Let me know your thoughts down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and I will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.